Uh-oh. The last cookie.
You can get a new box of cookies in as fast as an hour with Walmart Express Delivery.
Are you my guilty self-conscience?
No, I'm the voice offering you promo code EXPRESS for free delivery on your first order.
Hey, who ate my cookies?
You mean, these cookies?
Order now. Welcome to your Walmart. Promotion valid for first express delivery order. $50 minimum subject to availability. Restrictions apply.
Are your ulcerative colitis symptoms proving difficult to manage? Tremfya guselkumab can help you manage the cycle of UC symptoms. At 1 year, many patients taking Tremfya achieved clinical remission, and some patients also achieved endoscopic remission. Individual results may vary. Tremfya is a prescription medicine used to treat adults with moderately to severely active ulcerative colitis. Serious allergic reactions and increased risk of infections may occur. Before treatment, your doctor should check you for infections and TB. Tell your doctor if you have an infection, flu-like symptoms, or if you need a vaccine. Ask your doctor if Tremfya can help you manage the cycle of UC symptoms. Call 1-800-526-7736 to learn more or visit tremfyaradio.com.
This podcast is part of E2C Network, where we share the whole Auburn experience.
Hello and welcome to War Horses, the only college equestrian podcast that's feeling a little under the weather right now. I'm your host, Auburn Elvis. Let's talk about some college equestrian. Well, we're going to kick things off with some meet recaps. First up, Minnesota Crookston at South Dakota State. Now in this one, I thought it would probably go about 11-5 in favor of South Dakota State. Let's see what really happened. Fences was 3-1 South Dakota State. Flat was 3-2 South Dakota State. Horsemanship was 2-1 Minnesota Crookston. And reining was 4-1 South Dakota State. That made the final score 11-6 South Dakota State. So, yeah, this was an encouraging result for Minnesota Crookston. Even though they got the loss, you can tell they're getting better. They bagged 6 points overall, which might be a program high. They also won horsemanship, which I think is the second time this season that they've won an event. So some really good milestones for that program in their young history. So good job to them. For the Jackrabbits, they got the convincing home win. They looked good doing it. So good job to everybody. Next up, Auburn at SMU. All right, I warned everybody last week. I said, hey, Auburn fans, I know you're thinking, hey, everything's great. These are the old days, but a little bit of a reality check is probably coming. I thought, well, the stats suggested that Auburn was going to win by a couple of points, but I felt like SMU was going to win by a couple of points. Let's see what really happened. The day started off with fences that went 3-2 for Auburn. Okay, that's pretty good. Horsemanship was also going on in the Western Ring, and that went 3-1 for SMU. That's a bit of a surprise because Auburn tends to be pretty good in horsemanship. So at the half, SMU had the 5-4 lead, which those were Auburn's two best events. And so if they weren't winning at halftime with those events already on the board, things were not looking great for the Tigers. Over we go to the second half. Flat went 3-2 for SMU, and reining went 4-1 for SMU. That made the final score 12-7 SMU. So here we go. This is kind of what we expected. It was a 5-point loss. The stats thought Auburn should do better. But again, when you're on the road, it really gives such an advantage to the home team like that. And it's just tough. Plus, I've been telling everybody for the last 4 months about how good SMU really is. And now y'all finally see what I meant. But this is a big win for SMU. They get to close their regular season on a high note. They won't have a conference tournament since they're independent, so they're just going to sit back and wait and watch while everybody else rides in conference play. All right, another meet to look at, Fresno State at TCU. I thought TCU was going to win this one by 2-3 points. Let's see what happened. Fences went 4-1 for TCU. Flat went 4-1 for TCU. Horsemanship went 3-2 for TCU, and reining went 3-2 for TCU. That made the final score a whopping 14-6 for TCU. So yeah, Fresno State, they had a rough time of things on this one. They lost their best event, fences 4-1, and when that happens, you in for a long day. Can't really recover from that. Thought it would be a little bit closer, but sometimes the meet just gets away from you. But a good win for TCU. They just showed, hey, we're one of the top two teams in our conference, and yeah, with it being a home meet, not much chance for Fresno State in this one. Another meet to look at, Berry at Lynchburg. This is a single discipline meet. I thought thought the Hornets were going to win this one by about 5 or 6 points. Let's see what happened. Fences went 4-1 for Lynchburg, and flat was a 5-0 sweep for Lynchburg. That made the final score 9-1 Lynchburg. Yeah, Barry was pretty much overmatched in this one. The Vikings have looked good at times this season, so there was some hope that they could maybe keep this one a little closer, but Lynchburg is just loaded with talent, so there you go. For the Hornets, they showed up, they did what was expected of them, and that's what the great teams do. They just show up and put these other teams away. Enough said. UT Martin at South Carolina. I thought this one was going to be close. I thought South Carolina would win by a couple of points. Let's see what really happened. Fences went 4-1 for South Carolina. Flat went 3-1 for South Carolina. Horsemanship went 3-2 for UT Martin, and reining was a 2-2 tie. That made the final score 11-7 in favor of South Carolina. So UT Martin, they kept things close here. If this had been at home for them, who knows what would have happened. Maybe they would have gotten the win, but it wasn't. It was on the road. And so now the Skyhawks, they've closed out their regular season. They're going to get ready for the ECAC tournament, which they're going to host. For South Carolina, this was a good home win over a team that wasn't too far below them in the rankings. Winning this one keeps the Gamecocks solidly in position for an invitation to Ocala. Fresno State at Oklahoma State. I thought this one's going to be about a 2-point win for Oklahoma State. Let's see what really happened. Fences went 4-1 for Oklahoma State. Flat went 3-2 for Oklahoma State. Horsemanship went 3-2 for Oklahoma State. And reining went 4-1 for Oklahoma State. Final score was 14-6 Oklahoma State. So another rough outing for Fresno State. Sometimes that can happen when you got two of these road meets back-to-back like this. And the two events that they were counting on for points, Fences and reining, again, that did not materialize for them in this one, so that put them in the hole early, and they just couldn't get out of it. The Bulldogs are now going to get ready for the Big 12 tournament, which they're probably going to need to get a win somewhere in there just to get an invitation to Ocala. For Oklahoma State, this is basically the same thing we saw with the TCU Fresno State meet. This was a good win for them to show, hey, we're still at the top of the Big 12. Baylor at South Dakota State. I thought Baylor would win this one by about maybe 5 points or so. Let's see what really happened. Fences went 4-1 for Baylor. Flat went 5-0 for Baylor. Horsemanship went 3-2 for Baylor. And reining was a 2-2 tie. That made the final score 15-4 for Baylor. I think South Dakota State was hoping for a little bit better score here, but Baylor has been improving, and so this is what you get. The Jackrabbits are now going to get ready for the ECAC tournament. For Baylor, this was a good road win for the Bears. They needed to show that they have been improving. They did that, so getting this win over a team that they're pretty much expected to beat is exactly what they needed to do. All right, another meet, a big one here. Auburn at Texas A&M. So much like the SMU meet, I didn't give Auburn too much of a chance at winning this one. I thought the stats thought Auburn would win. I thought it was going to be about a 4-point win for Texas A&M. Let's see what really happened. The day started off with the flat, and Auburn won that one 3-2. Horsemanship was also going on, and Auburn won that one 3-2. So at half, you had Auburn up 6-4, and this was very encouraging because flat is not one of Auburn's more reliable events, so getting 3 points there was big. And it basically meant Auburn was in the driver's seat for this meet. If they could just take care of business in the second half, then victory was pretty likely. Let's see what happened in the second half. Fences went 4-1 for Auburn, and reining went 4-1 for Texas A&M. That made the final score 11-9 in favor of Auburn. This was a tough loss for Texas A&M. Until this, they were undefeated at home, which is a good benchmark to look at when you're looking for these teams that can win a championship. And like I said, they looked the part up until this weekend. They just let Auburn get hot on the flat, and that was pretty much the difference in this meet. For Auburn, this was a huge road win. Actually, this is probably the biggest win for any team this season. Like I said, until this meet, Texas A&M was in that group of 4 teams that could not be beaten at home. Well, Auburn beat them at home, so great win for Auburn. I did not think anybody could beat A&M at College Station. TCU couldn't do it, SMU couldn't do it, Georgia couldn't do it, but Auburn did it. Big win, best win for any team in the country this season happened this weekend. So now both these teams are going to head into the SEC tournament. Auburn will be the number 1 seed, and they're going to face 4 seed South Carolina. A&M will be the 3 seed, and they will face 2 seed Georgia. All right, got a couple of more meets that we want to talk about that happened. Baylor versus Minnesota Crookston. We thought the Bears were going to win this one convincingly, probably something in the neighborhood of 12-4 victory. Let's see what really happened. Fences went 4-0 for Baylor. Flat went 4-0 for Baylor. Horsemanship went 2-1 for Baylor, and reining went 2-1 for Baylor. Final score, 11-3 Baylor. So for Minnesota Crookston, the Golden Eagles, they got a few points in this meet, and they're continuing to build towards the future there. For the Bears, this was another solid win over a smaller program. They have now completed their regular season, and just like Fresno State, they're probably going to need a win in the Big 12 tournament if they want to get an invite to Ocala. Swanee at Lynchburg. Got another single discipline meet here. I thought this one might be a little close. Thought it was going to be about 6-4 Lynchburg. Let's see what happened. Fences went 3-2 for Lynchburg, and flat went 5-0, a big sweep for Lynchburg. So that made the final score 8-2 Lynchburg. Swanee got some points over Fences, but then they got swept over the flat. They probably hope for better there, but as we're seeing, sometimes there's just a big gap between those top 3 or 4 teams and then the rest of the field, and this year Swanee's in the rest of the field. Lynchburg just continues to roll. Both these teams are now going to get ready for the ODAC tournament. Last meet of the week, Bridgewater College versus Berry College. Now here, these two teams have faced before. I thought Bridgewater would probably end up winning this one 5-3. Let's see what really happened. Fences went 4-1 for Berry, and then flat was a 5-0 sweep for Berry. That made the final score 7-2 for Berry. Man, what a win for Berry. Now, well, first I'll talk about Bridgewater. This was tough for them. They've had some good meets earlier in the spring. They just didn't ride well this weekend. So now they're going to get ready for the ODAC tournament. But for Berry, man, oh my goodness, this was a great win. This is their first NCEA victory in program history, and they won it convincingly. So great job to them. Up until this weekend, they were the only single discipline team without a win, and we can't say that now because this was a great win for their program and for the sport because it shows that we've got increasing parity, and that is a good thing. All right, well, that was all of this week's action, so now let's take a look at the official Auburn Elvis College Equestrian Rankings. We had some unexpected results this past weekend, so I had to make a few changes in the rankings. At number 1, we have Auburn. The Tigers are 11-2. They end the regular season with the best record in the country. They were undefeated at home, and they have a pair of road victories over Texas A&M and Oklahoma State that are better than anybody else's resume. Also, as I mentioned, Auburn has clinched the top spot in the SEC tournament seeding, so they're going to face South Carolina in a few weeks. This podcast comes out on Wednesday, and the NCEA rankings come out on Tuesday. So if the voters have moved Auburn down to number 2, then they just aren't paying attention to the resumes. They're only looking at the meets that they want to look at. But hopefully that didn't happen. Hopefully they keep Auburn at number 1 where they deserve. Number 2 is SMU. The Mustangs are 10-4, good buddy, and they had a perfect spring campaign, just as I predicted. SMU is also undefeated at home, and they have a great road victory over Georgia that Auburn could not get, but TCU did get. So their resume isn't quite as good as Auburn, but it is still a great resume. It was not too long ago that the NCEA voters thought that SMU was the 7th best team in the country, and that is just as laughable then as it is today. So, yeah, SMU's your number 2 team. Number 3 is TCU. The Frogs are 8-4 with a big road meet at Oklahoma State coming up. They're the 3rd and final undefeated team at home in the nation, and their resume boasts a road win over Georgia, which is pretty dang good. If they could add a road win over Oklahoma State to that would be impressive enough to consider moving them up even higher. But even if they lose, I estimate they're still going to have the 3rd best resume in the nation. Number 4 is Texas A&M. The Aggies are 7-6. They're the best of that next group of teams, which only has a loss or 2 at home. Like we discussed, they lost at home to Auburn, but they have a good road win over Baylor to complement their resume. The Aggies finished 3rd in the SEC, like I said, and they're going to face Georgia in the SEC tournament. Speaking of which, number 5 is Georgia. The Bulldogs are 6-5. They had some early fall losses at home that really hurt their resume, but ever since basically that home win over Auburn, they have looked very strong, and they're heading into the SEC tournament as a very dangerous 2 seed that could win a title. Number 6 is Oklahoma State.
Yeehaw!
The Cowgirls are 7-4, and I know y'all all keep wondering how I have Oklahoma State below Georgia each week. Well, these two teams don't ride against each other, so we don't have that. All we can go by is common opponents. Georgia beat Auburn at home. Oklahoma State did not. Oklahoma State beat SMU at home, and Georgia did not. Okay, so those sort of cancel each other out. Georgia beat Fresno State on the road. Oklahoma State did not. So I think that gives the advantage to Georgia. But of course, this week, if Oklahoma State beats TCU at home, that's something that Georgia did not do, then I will reevaluate things. But for right now, Oklahoma State is 6. Number 7 is South Carolina. The Gamecocks are 6-5. They won 2 nice road meets out in California, and they beat a good UT Martin team at home this weekend to solidify their odds of getting an invite to Ocala, regardless of what happens in the SEC tournament. So now let's look at the last spot that would get into the national championship tournament if everything were being held this weekend. But it is not. But we still want to look at it that way. When you're looking at this spot, you're basically comparing 3 teams, Baylor, Fresno State, and UT Martin, okay? Now, UT Martin hasn't won enough big meets, so it's really down to Baylor and Fresno State. And so for me, number 8 is Baylor. The Bears are 5-6. When you compare Baylor to Fresno State, they split their home and home series, but the combined margin favors Baylor by just a few points. Baylor beat TCU at home. Fresno State did not. Baylor lost at home to Oklahoma State, but Fresno State did not. All the other common opponents went as expected, with both teams losing or winning as you would expect. So it's a bit of a toss-up right now. So right now I'm going to give a slight edge to Baylor because of that head-to-head margin of victory, and for beating TCU at home because that's just a bit more prestigious than Fresno State's home win over Oklahoma State. So that means the number 9 team is Fresno State. The Bulldogs are 7-6. They will finish 4th in the Big 12 standings by that margin of victory in the Baylor head-to-head that I just talked about. But it's not over for the Bulldogs yet. If they can get a win in the Big 12 tournament, likely that would come in the consolation meet against Baylor, then that would be enough to jump them over Baylor for that final spot in the national championship tournament. So we'll have to keep an eye on that. And then our last spot in the top 10 goes to UT Martin. The Skyhawks are 6-6, and a few months ago, the Skyhawks were in a good position to make the national championship tournament, but then Baylor, Fresno State, and South Carolina all started winning some big meets, and the Skyhawks did not. That kept UT Martin's resume limited to good but not great, and I feel like that even if they win the ECAC tournament that's coming up, they're not going to finish higher than 9th in the rankings. So, sorry Skyhawks, you really needed just one marquee win on your resume, and you just don't have that this year. Now let's look at the single discipline rankings. I'll go ahead and spoil things and tell you that nothing changed here. We had some meets, and we've got some meets coming up. We're going to talk about a few of those teams, but basically I'm just going to run through these pretty quickly. Number 1 is Sweetbriar. The Vixens are 6-2. They split a home and home with Lynchburg. Lynchburg has the margin of victory advantage in those, but the Vixens are undefeated at home, whereas the Hornets are not. Easy decision for me. Sweetbriar is number 1. But very close behind them, number 2 is Lynchburg. The Hornets are 6-5. They would be number 1 if their resume didn't have that home loss to Charleston or the road loss to Swanee. That's pretty much the long and short of things. Number 3 is Charleston. The Cougars are 4-3. As I mentioned, they beat Lynchburg in Lynchburg, something that I don't think has happened in NCEA competition ever. Beyond that, they've won and lost as expected for one of the top teams in the sport. I could understand if you have Dartmouth over them in your rankings, but for me, beating Lynchburg on the road is the ultimate tiebreaker in any decision between Charleston and another team that's close to them in the rankings. Number 4 is Dartmouth. The Green are 4-3. They won at home, and they have a road loss to Charleston that was expected. We don't know how they stack up against Sweetbriar and Lynchburg because they did not ride against those teams this season, but if Dartmouth keeps on winning, they're going to get their chance. Number 5 is Swanee. The Tigers are 5-4. They've been up and down this season. They beat Lynchburg at home, but then they turned right around and they lost to Bridgewater at home. So if they had not lost that home meet to Bridgewater, they would be able to make a good case for 3 or 4 in the rankings, but they did, so there you go. Number 6 is Centenary.
It's a twister! It's a twister!
I was never really a runner. The way I see running is a gift, especially when you have stage 4 cancer. I'm Anne. I'm running the Boston Marathon, presented by Bank of America. I run for Dana-Farber Cancer Institute to give people like me a chance to thrive in life, even with cancer.
Join Bank of America in helping Anne's cause. Give if you can at BofA.com/support-Ann. What would you like the power to do? References to charitable organizations is not an endorsement by Bank of America Corporation. Copyright 2025.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile with a message for everyone paying big wireless way too much. Please, for the love of everything good in this world, stop. With Mint, you can get premium wireless for just $15 a month. Of course, if you enjoy overpaying, no judgments, but that's weird. Okay, one judgment. Anyway, give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
The Cyclones are 3-4. They've won the meets you would expect, and they've lost the meets you would expect as well. They have one more chance to shake things up with a visit to Charleston, so we'll see. Number 7 is Sacred Heart. The Pioneers are 1-4. They are as unpredictable as Swanee, just on a smaller scale. They beat Charleston at home. They lost to Dartmouth at home. But then they almost beat Dartmouth on the road, and that Charleston home win is enough to keep them above Berry and Bridgewater. Speaking of which, I really considered whether Berry should move up, but when I reevaluated their whole resumes after that win, it's really just one win for Berry. Whereas Bridgewater has a win over Berry in the fall, plus they have a win over Swanee, and that's enough to keep them at number 8. Number 8 is Bridgewater. The Eagles are 2-4. They improved a lot this season. They beat Swanee on the road and Berry at home. They did just lose to Berry, but overall resumes are more important than the most recent results. And number 9 is Berry. The Vikings are 1-3. They got their first program win this weekend at Bridgewater, and they have a meet at Charleston coming up with a chance to move up the rankings if they could get that big win. So we'll see. Okay, now let's take a look at some meet previews. Okay, coming up on Wednesday, we've got TCU at Oklahoma State. This meet got postponed from a few weeks back because of weather, so now they're going to get it together and settle this last outstanding conference meet for them. I think TCU matches up well, maybe even a little better on paper, but with this being at home, I think the Cowgirls are going to prevail. Also, if Oklahoma State wins by more than 2, they will be the number 1 seed in the Big 12 tournament. I think they're going to do that. I think the Cowgirls are going to win this one by about 4 points. Centenary at Charleston. Centenary has beaten Bridgewater and Sacred Heart this season, but I think Charleston on the road will be too tough for them. When I look at the stats, it favors the Pioneers. The stats say fences will go 3-2 for Centenary and flat will be 2-2, a tie. Now, obviously, that would be a 1-point win for Centenary, but with it being at home, I'm going to give Charleston enough of a boost that maybe flips that flat to a 3-2 for Charleston and ends up having the Cougars win this one in a tiebreaker. Berry at Charleston. Here the stats say that Charleston should win, and I think being at home reinforces that. I think the Cougars win fences 3-2, maybe 4-1, and then Charleston wins flat 3-2. So that would make this a 6-4 or 7-3 Charleston home win. So those are all the previews for the final week of competition. After this, it is on into the postseason. Well, that's all for this episode. I'm your host, Auburn Elvis. Well, thank you very much for listening, and war horses.
Thank you for tuning in to today's episode on the E2C Network. On your way out, I want to remind you to stop by e2cnetwork.com. It's your one-stop shop for all our content across our podcast, YouTube channel, and much more. To stay up to date with us, make sure you're following social media accounts such as Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. While our content here may always be Auburn sports heavy, if it's orange and blue, it's what we do. War Eagle.